The sun burned mercilessly over the Arizona desert, casting long, sharp shadows across the dry land. Dust swirled around the wooden posts of an abandoned trading station where the wind sang through the cracks of forgotten walls. A lone horse stood tied to a barrel, its head bowed low, tail flicking lazily against flies. Beside it knelt a woman and her little girl, both barefoot, their clothes worn thin by hunger and travel. The woman's hair was braided, her eyes tired but unbroken, like the last ember of a dying fire. A small wooden sign rested beside her, hire for one night. The man who stood before her was a cowboy named Wade Hunter, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dust-stained duster coat, and crowned with a hat that shadowed his sun-hardened face. He was a drifter, a man of few words, known in these parts only by the sound of his boots and the silent presence of his revolver. As he looked down at the woman and her child, something unfamiliar stirred inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Compassion. The woman spoke first, her voice trembling but strong. "Please, hire me for one night. My daughter hasn't eaten in 2 days." She gestured toward the girl, who sat quietly, her small hands clasped together, staring at the piece of cornbread in Wade's hand as though it were a treasure from heaven. Wade didn't speak. He just stared at them, his jaw tight, the silence stretching like the desert around them. Finally, he broke it. "You from the Apache camp down south?" he asked. She nodded, eyes dropping to the sand. "They burned it. Soldiers came through last week. We ran." He glanced toward the horizon, where the faint smoke of another burned settlement smudged the sky. He'd seen it before, the cruelty, the despair, the endless cycle of hate that turned men into ghosts. Wade wasn't a good man by any means. He'd fought for money, killed for less, and carried sins that the desert itself could not bury. But there was something in the widow's voice, a plea not just for survival, but for dignity. He kneeled, holding out the cornbread. The little girl's eyes widened, but she didn't move until her mother nodded softly. "Take it, Naya," she whispered. The child took it with both hands, breaking it in half before eating, offering the other half to her mother. Wade watched quietly, his throat tightening. He'd seen starvation before, but there was something different about this moment. Something human, pure and painfully honest. "What can you do?" he finally asked. The widow lifted her head. "I can cook, mend, clean. I'll work your camp, tend your horse, anything. Just for one night. Enough to feed her." Wade hesitated. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, especially not strangers on the open trail. But looking at her and the cracked lips, the dirt-streaked cheeks, the proud, steady eyes that refused to beg, he couldn't walk away. "Get up," he said finally. She blinked, unsure if she heard right. "Get up and bring the girl. You'll work tonight." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, whispering something in her native tongue. A prayer, maybe, or a thank you. Wade turned away, not wanting her to see the guilt flicker across his face. He wasn't helping her out of kindness. At least that's what he told himself. Maybe he was just tired of watching the world break people who didn't deserve it. They rode together through the setting sun. The widow sat behind him on his horse, holding her daughter tight, her eyes wide as the desert turned gold and crimson around them. Wade's ranch was small, a single cabin near a creek, 6 horses, a fire pit, and the silence of a man who lived too long with ghosts. As they arrived, the girl's excitement broke through her hunger. "Mama, look, water!" she cried, running toward the stream. The widow smiled faintly for the first time. Wade dismounted and tossed her a blanket. "You can stay by the fire. There's beans in the pot. Don't burn 'em." As the night settled, the stars came alive, endless and cold above the open plains. The widow worked silently, washing dishes, mending a torn saddle strap, her hands moving with quiet grace. Wade sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The girl, now full and drowsy, slept wrapped in her mother's shawl. The widow glanced at Wade. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly. Wade didn't look at her. "Didn't say I helped. You're working, ain't you?" She smiled faintly. "Yes." But not many men would have stopped. He said nothing, but the truth sat heavy between them. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice, long gone now, telling him that someday the desert would test what kind of man he really was. Maybe this was that test, maybe not. Hours passed. The fire burned low. The widow stood, walked closer to the light, and said quietly, "Tomorrow. We'll leave before dawn. Thank you, cowboy." Wade looked up at her, seeing something in her eyes that words couldn't capture. Strength, loss, and the unyielding will to protect her child. He wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he handed her a small sack, jerky, bread, and a few coins. "Take it," he muttered. "Ain't much." She froze. "I cannot take this." "You can," he replied, his tone sharp. "And you will." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the drifter and the widow, two broken souls crossing paths under a sky too big for both. Then she nodded. "May the spirits watch over you, Wade Hunter." He didn't ask how she knew his name. As she turned to leave, the girl half awake in her arms, the wind carried her voice softly through the desert. "Maybe someday we'll meet again." Wade watched her walk into the moonlight, her figure fading into the horizon like a dream that never belonged to him. The cowboy stood there a long while, hat in hand, the old ache of loneliness rising again. Somewhere deep down he knew this night had changed. 3 weeks passed since Wade Hunter last saw the Apache widow and her little girl vanish into the sunrise. The desert had grown hotter, crueler, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer like ghosts. Wade tried to forget them, tried to bury their faces beneath long rides, whiskey, and the endless silence of the plains. But every time he rode past the creek where they'd shared that one night of fragile peace, he saw the little girl's smile, faint, tired, but full of hope. It haunted him more than the gunfights, more than the graves he'd left behind. That morning, Wade was in Silver Ridge, a dusty town built on greed and whiskey. The saloon doors creaked as he stepped in, boots heavy with road dust. The smell of tobacco and old dreams hung thick in the air. He sat at the bar, ordered a drink, and listened to the low murmur of gossip that filled the room. Then he heard it, a voice he couldn't ignore. "They caught a squaw woman near the river," a ranch hand said, laughing cruelly. "Sheriff says she stole food from the army wagons. She's locked up till they decide what to do." Another voice added, "She's got a kid with her, too. Poor thing won't last long in that cell." Wade froze. His jaw tightened. Without another word, he tossed a coin on the counter and walked out. His horse whinnied as he swung into the saddle, spurring it hard toward the sheriff's office at the edge of town. The closer he got, the angrier he became. Not the kind of rage that comes from hate, but the kind that rises from guilt. The jail was small, made of sun-bleached wood and iron bars that rattled in the wind. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a red face and cruel eyes, looked up from his desk as Wade entered. "Afternoon, Hunter," he said lazily. "What brings you here?" "I heard you've got a woman locked up," Wade said. "Apache with a child." The sheriff chuckled. "That so? Why you care, cowboy? She's a thief. Army property's off limits, you know that." Wade's voice hardened. "I ain't here for a lecture. I'm here to see her." The sheriff leaned back, eyeing him. "You running a charity now, Hunter? Or something else?" Wade didn't answer. He just stared until the man sighed, picked up his keys, and nodded toward the back. 5 minutes. Don't say I didn't warn you. The cell was dark and smelled of rust and dust. The widow sat against the wall, her hair tangled, her face bruised but proud. Her daughter lay beside her, weak and pale. When she looked up and saw Wade, her eyes widened in disbelief. "You," she whispered. "Why are you here?" "Because you shouldn't be," Wade said quietly. "What happened?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "The soldiers burned what was left of our camp. We were hiding near the river. My child was starving. I took bread from their wagon. They caught me." Wade gritted his teeth. He looked at the girl, too still, too quiet. He turned to the sheriff standing in the doorway. "How much to release him?" The sheriff laughed. "Release him? You gone soft, Hunter? She's an Indian. Rules don't apply to her." Wade's eyes darkened. "I asked how much." The sheriff smirked, trying to measure him. $100. That's the fine for theft." Wade reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and dropped it on the desk. The sound of coins filled the silence. "There's 200. You didn't see me. You didn't see her." The sheriff stared at him, then shrugged. "You always were a fool for lost causes. Take 'em before I change my mind." When Wade led them out of town, the sun was setting again, just like the first time they met. The widow rode behind him, her daughter clinging weakly to her waist. For hours they didn't speak, the desert wind carrying only the sound of hooves and memories. At last, Wade stopped near a rocky ridge and helped them down. He built a small fire, poured water, and handed the widow a piece of jerky. "Eat," he said. She shook her head. "Give it to Naya." He handed it to the girl, who took a tiny bite and smiled faintly. "Thank you, cowboy," she whispered. That smile was enough to break something inside him. After a long silence, the widow looked at him. "You should not have come for us. They will hunt you for this." Wade stared into the fire. "Let 'em. Ain't the first time." She studied him for a moment, her voice soft. "Why help us again?" He didn't answer right away. The flames danced in his eyes. Finally, he said, "Because I used to have a family too. Army took 'em. Called it justice," and his voice cracked, low and bitter. "Your story ain't new to me, ma'am." The widow's eyes softened. "Then you understand." Wade nodded. "Too well." That night, as they rested under the stars, the sound of coyotes echoed across the desert. Wade sat awake, revolver in hand, listening to the crackle of the fire. He knew he'd made enemies in Silver Ridge. The sheriff wouldn't let this go. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. At dawn, the peace shattered. 3 riders appeared on the ridge among the sheriff's men. Guns glinted in the rising sun. Wade stood slowly, pulling his revolver. "Stay behind me," he told the widow. The lead rider shouted, "Hand 'em over, Hunter." "Ain't worth dying for." Wade's reply was simple. "Maybe not, but I ain't letting you touch 'em." The standoff was brief but brutal. Gunfire ripped through the morning. Dust exploded around them. Wade moved like a man possessed, fast, deadly, silent. 2 men fell before they could even reload. The third turned to run, but Wade's bullet found his shoulder, sending him crashing into the sand. When the echoes faded, only Wade remained standing, smoke curling from his revolver. The widow rushed forward, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered. Wade holstered his gun, breathing hard. "No, I just evened the scales." As the sun climbed higher, they buried the bodies beneath the ridge. Wade turned to her. "You can't stay here. Head north. There's a mission in Santa Fe. Tell Father Caleb I sent you. He'll help." She looked at him, tears glimmering. "And you? What will you do?" He smiled faintly, a ghost of warmth breaking through his rough face. "Me guess I'll keep riding. Always been my way." The widow stepped closer, pressing her hand to his chest. You are not what they say you are, Wade Hunter. The desert may take everything, but not your soul. For a long moment they stood there, two lost souls bound by fate and forgiveness. Then she mounted the horse, her daughter behind her, and rode toward the rising sun. Wade watched them go until they disappeared into the golden light. Then he turned toward the empty horizon, hat pulled low, and whispered, Ride safe, Apache widow. The world don't deserve you. As he rode away, the wind carried her last words, faint and eternal. May the spirits remember your name, cowboy. And somewhere in that endless desert, Wade Hunter, the loner, the drifter, the gunman, finally found something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, something in him forever. He looked up at the stars, their cold fire burning against the black sky. Maybe, ma'am, he whispered. Maybe someday.